What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Wednesday, July 20th, 2016, middle of the weekday, hump day, starting that long, slow glide down to Kaahumanu Friday, and another weekend of who knows what is going to happen next. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Couple of historical notes. Today is the 47th anniversary of the Apollo 11 moon landing. And because I know this will trigger a flood of phone calls and emails saying, oh, it was all faked and all the rest of that stuff, because the propagandists are trying to make the independent media look silly in the hope the American people will go back to the major corporate TV networks. It's not going to work, but they'll keep on trying. So I posted a link to a collection of third-party evidence for the Apollo moon landings, primarily consisting of images of those landing sites from satellites owned by other countries, not all of whom are very friendly to the United States of America. Now, on a little more personal note, today is the 40th anniversary of the Viking 1 landing on Mars. And for those of you watching on BAM User, I dusted off my old Viking Lander model for you to all look at here. And so we have that little bit of history. And a little side story. We were supposed to land on the 4th of July, the bicentennial, 1976. And the orbiting team were not able to find a suitable landing spot. The first one turned out to be way too rough, and getting calls from the White House saying, you put it down on the 4th, put it down on the 4th, and flight management stood firm. And so finally the White House said, okay, well, if you can't make the 4th, then delay till the 20th and put it down on the anniversary of the Apollo 11 landing, and that's, of course, what ultimately happened. That's why they're both on the same date. And flight management was very prudent, because when the second lander put down, it landed within feet of a giant boulder, which was nicknamed Joe, and I don't remember why. But had the lander come down on top of it, it would have flipped over and been destroyed. So that's why Viking 1 and Apollo are on the same day, because the White House was tinkering with the science yet again. And, of course, to basically celebrate Viking, I reposted my article on Viking, Life on Mars, and Dr. Gilbert Levin, because we're seeing today, NASA, which stands for Never a Straight Answer, is still hemming and hawing about life on Mars, maybe, could be, might, could be indications of. And yet, all the way back in 1976, Dr. Levin's labeled release experiment did find evidence of indigenous life on Mars. And history, unfortunately, has a bad habit of giving the wrong people credit for discoveries, and I don't want to see that happen with Dr. Levin. All right, so let's get back into the news of the day, and it's official. Donald Trump wins the GOP presidential nomination. It happened shortly after we went off the air yesterday, and in fact, it happened in the middle of my interview with Jim Goddard, and I'm sitting here trying to talk, and at the meantime, I'm like dancing around in my chair and all the rest of that situation. So that was a win in this long battle to save this country. And, of course, immediately all of the dump Trump people are saying, oh, we need a revote. There was irregularities. It should have gone this. It should have gone that. And they're still out there saying Ted Cruz should have gotten more votes. Ted Cruz should not have gotten a vote at all. He is not eligible to serve as President of the United States of America under that Constitution. And anybody who is still promoting him as President, either now or 2020, needs to be kicked out of public life, because if you're not going to play by the rules, you shouldn't be allowed to play at all. I mean, look how strict they are being with the Russians over at the Olympics. And that's just a sporting event. We're talking about running the actual nation. Shouldn't we be just as strict? If you don't play by the rules, you get kicked out. We should be. Now, Trump's calls for party unity are working. 95% of all Republicans are now saying they will back Donald Trump against Hillary Clinton. This is Hillary's worst nightmare, because the GOP is uniting behind Trump, and the Democratic Party is factionalized over Hillary's stealing of the nomination from Bernie Sanders, with many, if not most, of Bernie Sanders' supporters saying they're going to cross party lines and vote for Trump or vote independent. So Hillary's going into November with a badly split party who is very, very angry with the Democratic Party leadership for the very heavy-handed way in which they coronated Empress Hillary the First here. Now, Donald Trump has installed as one of the planks of the GOP platform the reinstatement of Glass-Steagall. And immediately it drew an angry reaction from Wall Street saying, you can't do this. This will be the end of us. We won't be able to retire as billionaires at age 25. What's wrong with you? And, of course, everybody's saying, well, the Democrats are promising exactly the same thing. But the difference is Wall Street has been a very heavy donor to Hillary Clinton. They have her in their pocket. The Democrats may talk about Glass-Steagall to make it look like they're worried about ordinary Americans, but Wall Street knows Hillary won't let it happen. Because they own her. They absolutely own her. That's one of the reasons people love Donald Trump. He's got his own money. He doesn't need to go begging to special interest groups to get his money. He's got his own cash. He can't be bought. Now, apparently, even though the protesters outside the Republican National Convention are not as numerous or violent as had been the concern last week, it's still getting pretty icky out there. Apparently, members of the KKK, Black Lives Matter, and the Westboro Baptist Church apparently are flinging bags of their urine at each other. And I would have paid good money to see that. That there's quality entertainment there. And a reminder, story that was covered over at 12160, Trump protesters have openly admitted they are there being paid $16 an hour to go on out and say, Trump is bad, Trump is bad. And it's really embarrassing because the media will say, all right, why is Trump bad? Well, Trump is bad because he's bad. Because he's bad. Because he's bad. And they don't really know anything about it because they're just there at $16 an hour to do that. And it is getting very, very testy out there. The Democrats are just absolutely in a panic over the fact that the mother of the Benghazi victim was given a platform to basically go after Hillary, Pat Smith. And we've had videos of her talking about what's going on. And it isn't just the loss of her son. It was the insult heaped on her when Pat Smith went public saying that Hillary had told her it was a terror attack one day before they came out with this nonsensical story about this non-existent movie based on a hastily edited trailer cut from yet another movie to say, oh, that's what this was all about. And when Pat Smith went public on that, Hillary Clinton smeared her on national TV as a liar. So anybody out there who thinks that Hillary's a champion of women, you look at how Hillary treated Pat Smith, not to mention Jennifer Flowers and all those other ladies, the victims of Bill Clinton's sexual appetites. Kathleen Wiley, I don't know if she lost her house or not, but she was on the verge of it last I heard. So anyway, the Democrats are just furious about that. They just think it's icky poo to bring up Benghazi or anything Hillary has done. And they're trying to refocus on, she's a woman, that's why you should vote for her. She's a woman, it's time for a woman president here. And then they're back to that whole one. And screaming that all of the history of Hillary's misdeeds is a plot by the vast right-wing conspiracy. And the only reason it all looks so real, and Hillary seems to be right in the middle of it, she was just going along with the joke. You know, she just thought it was funny as all heck. I'm going to play along here that we murdered Vince Foster here. You know, they'll forget about it in a couple of weeks. So over at GQ magazine, they have this ultra-liberal writer, Bethlehem Scholes, went out and posted on Twitter that he wanted to beat Pat Smith to death for daring to get up there and say bad things about his goddess, Empress Hillary the First. Now, GQ magazine has apologized, but the damage is already done. And you can almost smell the panic coming out of Hillary's campaign. They know it's a long way till November, and they're in trouble. They're just hanging on in the manufactured corporate media polls. All the online polls already have Donald Trump way, way ahead. And they're out there making the most ridiculous statements. Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who I thought was supposed to be stepping down as chair of the Democratic National Committee, after all the vote fraud and everything else that was going on, came on out with a quote, "Hillary is the most admired and respected woman in the entire world." And on the basis of that one statement, I think it's time to have mandatory drug testing of everybody who's in politics, because Debbie Wasserman Schultz is clearly high as a kite on something to come out with this idea that Hillary's admired and respected. She's feared, especially by all the women who were preyed on by Bill Clinton, but fear does not equal respect. And here we have an article that really gets right down to it. Investment Watch blog. Hillary Clinton's recorded failures prove hard to forget. Democrats in full-blown panic mode about Clinton's polls. Well, Hillary's crimes and failures are not going to be forgotten between now and November, because we here on the independent media are going to keep them in the public eye. They're going to be regularly featured every single day on the website and this radio show, because people have to know, as Richard Nixon said, people have a right to know if their president's a crook. Of course, then he went on to lie and say that he wasn't a crook. And look where that wound up. Now, Chris Christie, in his speech before the RNC, basically came out and said, lock her up. Everybody's using that. Hillary for prison, or Hillary Pillary. And they even had the banner, Hillary for prison, flying over the RNC. And, of course, Hillary's defenders are out there saying, this is just excessive campaign rhetoric. No, it isn't. Hillary violated Title 18. And Comey may have let her off on the excuse that he doesn't know that she intended to do wrong, but that's irrelevant to Title 18. Title 18 includes exposure of U.S. national secrets through carelessness and neglect, which Comey said Hillary Clinton was definitely guilty of, extreme carelessness. So there's a new campaign slogan for the Clinton campaign out there. Vote for Hillary Clinton because America deserves an extremely careless president. Now, over at Judicial Watch, they are locked in a battle with the Department of Justice over having Hillary Clinton testify under oath regarding the very unusual employment arrangement of her good friend and Anthony Weidner's wife, Huma Abedin, which did not comply with departmental policy, and apparently there was some double dipping going on in there. And Hillary's lawyers and the Department of Justice are insisting Hillary doesn't need to testify because everything that the Judicial Watch is asking was already covered in the other depositions. Now, there's two problems with that. First of all, how do Hillary's lawyers and the Justice Department know what Judicial Watch is going to ask? And the answer is they don't, unless they've got Judicial Watch completely bugged from top to bottom. And we know why they're fighting tooth and nail. They're already looking at a possible perjury charge over Hillary's testimony under oath last October regarding the email server, at least 3 statements of which are now known to have been materially false. And they don't want to give Judicial Watch another chance to trap Hillary Clinton into having to tell another lie under oath, which would lead to another perjury charge. Now, yesterday we were talking about an effort by Congressman Jason Chaffetz and House Judiciary Committee Chairman Bob Goodlatte to enlist the aid of U.S. Attorney Phillips in bringing a perjury charge against Hillary Clinton. And apparently the congressional website, which had a page on this measure, that page has now vanished completely. It's been gone for 2 days. And people are asking, just who gave the order to take that page down and cover it all up? Because somebody certainly did. And if it was the Obama White House, that's obstruction of justice, and that's an impeachable offense. And it's not too late to impeach and forcibly remove Obama from the White House, thereby staining his historical legacy as it so richly deserves. Now, there's another scandal that we should not lose sight of. Everybody's focused on the email server, the possible espionage behind it. But there are other things we should not lose track of. While Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, according to the State Department Inspector General, $6 billion vanished without a trace. Now, Hillary's defenders are out there saying, no, the money didn't vanish. The IG just said the bookkeeping was so sloppy they weren't sure where it went. Well, if you don't know where it went, then how can you be sure that it's still there? So they're thrashing about on that one. Personally, I think you ought to look for a sudden $6 billion influx into that Clinton Foundation. We're going to go ahead and take a phone call. Mike in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Mike, are you there in Texas?
Yes, I am here.
Okay.
I can hear you, but I can't.
Okay, you're on the air. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of point something out. There's a lot of people on my social media that are all big Hillary supporters and defenders and whatnot. And one of the common threads that they're kind of pushing is, okay, yeah, Richard Nixon was a crook and this and that, and he created a crime, or he committed a crime much worse than what Hillary did, so that makes it okay. But I want to see a criminal lawyer get up in front of a judge and say, okay, O.J. Simpson got away with murder, so that makes it okay for my person, whatever, to get off top.
Well, anytime somebody says about that, not necessarily Richard Nixon, but, all these other secretaries of state, they were doing the same thing, and you should let Hillary go. And my usual response, because 9 times out of 10 I'm talking to a female, and say, look, some men get away with rape. Are you telling me you don't think we should punish the rapists that get caught? And that, of course, slams them dead in their tracks. You need to remember, though, that a lot of the pro-Hillary people you find on social media are paid to be there, just like those Donald Trump protesters. One of Hillary's PACs is running literally $1 million operation of cyber warfare and cyber propaganda.
Yeah, some of these people, though, they're the new liberals that went to college, got indoctrinated with that whole thing going on now, because being supposedly college educated automatic pretty much libtard for me personally. So it's kind of just, I don't know, it's just ridiculous. It's just, they admit them to doing a crime, but then it's okay for whatever, a police to shoot dead some black guy or whatever for committing a crime, then that's okay, because it was justified, but it's not justified for her to be locked up in prison.
Well, again, you're wasting your time arguing with people who are paid to argue with you in order to waste your time. So you need to focus on talking to people who are receptive to what's going on, and not get sucked into these little wrestling matches in the mud pit. Because again, Hillary has this very well-funded online propaganda operation going on. We know the social media is on her side. They're downvoting, if not deleting, anything critical of Hillary. This is going to be a fistfight for the future of this country. And Hillary is going to cheat any way that she feels she needs to. And like I said, there's a tremendous dichotomy between the online corporate media polls, which have Hillary and Trump in a tie, versus the online website polls where Trump is just way, way out ahead. And it's that disparity between, the so-called official polls and what we're getting from real people that has also cast suspicion on the legitimacy and honesty of the primaries.
I don't waste any time much more than I need to. I just wanted to point that out, just with my experience with some of these people, some of her defenders out there. And now the new thread is going and bashing Melania and Trump on the whole speech the other day. It's just ridiculous. But either way, I just wanted to point that out. That's all I got, Mike. You have a great one. All
right. Thanks an awful lot for the phone call, and we're going to let you go here. And, yes, you need to understand that Hillary comprehends how important social media presence is. And she's got the money to be able to go on out and hire as many people as she needs to try and control the online discussion. There are public relations firms that do nothing but plant people in social media to argue a particular position. And their biggest customers are governments and politicians. And so you need to understand the front line in the war for the minds of America is right here on the Internet. And the other side loves to play dirty because the lobbying laws do not require hired online shills to reveal who they are. They're allowed to pretend they're general public. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we need to do our little shout-out to our on-air affiliates. We forgot to do it at 6 minutes after the top of the hour, but we know you're out there. We appreciate your being part of the Republic Broadcasting Network. Talking about polls, one of the reasons the Clinton camp may be starting to panic is that black Americans, despite all this obvious race baiting and Hillary Clinton getting on out there and saying, the white people need to acknowledge their privilege and all the rest of that, black Americans are actually starting to move away from the Democratic plantation and support Donald Trump. And they all say the same thing. Hillary is saying exactly what we want to hear. We have no reason to think she will ever keep her word. And that is going to be Hillary's downfall. We have Latinos who are on Trump's side. And I think what we're seeing is a growing movement among the legal immigrants who are welcome here, and they don't want to be tainted and stained by being mixed in with the illegal immigrants. And they're starting to think Trump's got the right idea. Now, amazingly enough, the current Republican National Convention is the first convention in decades without a representative of the Bush family showing up. And amazingly enough, the Bush family is endorsing Hillary Clinton, the Democrat. Now, why, oh why might that be? Well, I told you yesterday. Remember back during Prohibition, the rum runners made enough money to buy their way into the highest levels of the government. That's where the Kennedy dynasty came from. Old Joe Kennedy was a rum runner, and his son got to be president. Now we have the war on drugs, and those who are trafficking in those illicit substances have enough money to buy their way into the highest levels of the government. And remember, Iran-Contra, the Bushes and the Clintons were both implicated in this CIA gun and drug running operation. The northern end of this whole pipeline was in Arkansas under then Governor Bill Clinton. That's where all their wealth and power began. We're in the same exact situation as back during Prohibition, a completely corrupted government. Now we're seeing an article coming out of thehornnews.com. Apparently Ted Cruz is going to be on the podium at the Republican National Convention tonight. He is still refusing to endorse Donald Trump. And the word is that Ted Cruz is going to come on out and lambaste the crowd for nominating Donald Trump instead of himself. And apparently is going to be trying, finally understands he cannot hijack this convention, but is going to be laying the groundwork for another run at the presidency in 2012. Now, somebody needs to do an ice bucket challenge on Ted Cruz's head and all of his supporters and remind them, Ted Cruz does not qualify as a natural-born citizen. He was born in Canada, out of wedlock, of two parents who were Canadian citizens at the time. And because he was born out of wedlock, he does not qualify for birthright citizenship because his mother's from Delaware. Again, if you don't want to play by the rules, get out of the game. Why are we so strict with Olympic stars or football stars or basketball stars where if they don't follow the rules, oh, heaven forbid, they're kicked out? We need to be doing the same thing to the government. Either play by the rules or you're benched, possibly for the season, possibly for your career. Now, apparently there's yet another lawsuit being filed to hold up certification in several states of the Democratic primaries and forcing a complete recount. And the evidence in this lawsuit filed by the Institute for American Democracy and Election Integrity is relying on that Stanford study showing a clear disparity between official results versus exit polls in precincts with paper ballots and hand counting versus those precincts with the electronic machines, which showed a consistent 8 to 9% shift towards Hillary Clinton. That is statistically impossible for that to happen in a fair system. So they're going to court and they're going to say this needs to be recounted. And my philosophy on that is, if the government can't prove beyond all doubt the accuracy, honesty, and fairness of elections, we are under no obligation to obey them, pay their bills, and sacrifice our children in their wars of conquest. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, one of the big issues going into November is keeping the vote to the American people as it belongs. And we know there's a major problem with illegals voting, and there are all these court fights going on where the Democrats are going on in and saying that being required to show an ID to vote is discriminatory. Really? How? If you're a legal American citizen, you've got ID. And only legal American citizens are supposed to vote. So how is it discriminatory to demand a photo ID? Now, down in Texas, they've gone the Democratic route. They're out there saying that requiring the showing of identification is discriminatory and it will exclude certain classes of people from voting. Yeah, the illegal immigrants who aren't supposed to be voting in the first place. Now, Judicial Watch has joined with the Allied Educational Foundation and filed an amicus curiae, friend of the court brief, with the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit in the case of NAACP versus McCrory. Now, the brief argues in support of a lower court ruling that the 2013 North Carolina election integrity law, which includes a requirement voters show a photo identification, is valid. The only people who are opposed to proving who you are to vote are those who aren't supposed to be voting. It's that obvious. And I'm very, very angered by these politicians who seem to think this is a really good thing to do. And I'll tell you why. You know, they're out there saying, you can't do that. I need those loyal Democratic voters because today's illegal immigrants are tomorrow's loyal Democrats. And again, it goes back to something I said yesterday. We, the American people, built this nation. The doctors, the teachers, the bakers, the carpenters, the architects, the electricians, the plumbers, the road layers, Americans, with our own hands, have built this nation up over 200 years. And what we want this nation to do is to be bequeathed to the next generation of Americans, our children, as it was bequeathed to us. But we seem to have a lot of politicians over on the Democratic camp who want to basically steal our children's inheritance and trade it to these illegal immigrants and refugees in exchange for their votes. They're literally stealing our country and bartering it off to help win an election with people who shouldn't be allowed to vote in the first place. That is a betrayal of the nation and its people, because this nation does belong to we the American people. This government supposedly belongs to we the people. It says so right up at the top of that Constitution. And we've got way too many politicians, too big for their britches, who seem to think holding elected office gives them ownership over the United States, and it does not. We had that caller who called into the show yesterday saying, well, when the United States became United States, Inc., the possession changed, and no, it didn't. You can create a corporation. It doesn't give you ownership over anything. That USA Inc., if it was selling shares in the United States, it may have been selling something that was not their property. It was a fraud on the American people and a fraud on those who bought in. But we, the American people, built this nation. We, the American people, own this nation. And where we say it goes is to the next generation of Americans. It's not to be bartered away to help steal elections by anybody. Now then, getting over to the war zones, and things are getting very, very ugly. There's a video that's been circulating around on how some of these terrorist groups that we call the moderates and the U.S. government openly admits arming and supplying, apparently beheaded a child, 10 years old. And they videoed it, and they said, hey, this is great, look at what we did. They put it out on the Internet, went viral around the world, revealing that the U.S. government is spending your tax dollars to support some absolute monsters in Syria for the sole purpose of depriving Syria of its democratically elected government. And these are the people that the U.S. kept insisting were the good guys and deserved our support. You know, besides that 10-year-old kid, he was a Palestinian. He doesn't matter anyway. It's not like they killed an Israeli. That would be really serious. The civilian death toll from coalition airstrikes in Syria could be the single largest in a U.S.-led war anywhere against ISIS. And apparently they're killing more civilians. They're mistaking them for ISIS fighters. They're not being careful with their targets. Syria has gone to the United Nations saying you must do something after French and U.S. airstrikes kill over 140 innocent civilians. Now, the U.S. has responded to the scandal by saying they may pause the support of the Syrian rebels following the beheading of this Palestinian boy. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, pause is over. And apparently the State Department issued a statement saying there will be consequences if the gruesome videos of the death are true. Meaning the U.S. will make really bad faces. We'll wag our finger at you mightily. Don't make us look bad. It's amazing. Now, France has announced that the West is getting ready to strike on the Islamic State in Iraq. Says apparently forces from Libya are there. And we know what's really going on. They're getting ready to carve off a chunk of Iraq for a new Kurdistan to go with the chunk they're going to carve off of Turkey and Syria. And I think right now the situation in Turkey, Erdogan is not going to go along with that one tiny bit. Now, Erdogan's purge has now reached 50,000 individuals either thrown in prison or fired or their careers ruined. Turkey is announcing emergency measures. They've already revoked the licenses of 24 radio and television stations. This coup has basically given Erdogan license to stop being a democratic nation and be a full-blown Islamic dictatorship, the very sort of government we're supposed to be at odds with all over the Middle East. Turkey has now blocked access to WikiLeaks because WikiLeaks announced they were going to leak some emails revealing the corruption of Erdogan's government. So Erdogan is definitely turned into a dictator. The duck test applies. If it looks like a dictator and acts like a dictator and smells like a dictator, it's probably a dictator. And in response to all of the turmoil in Turkey, Standard & Poor's has cut Turkey's credit rating deeper into junk. And S&P is saying there's a period of heightened unpredictability, and they really don't think it's a good place to be investing money. And obviously, I would tend to agree with that. Now, over in Yemen, there's a standoff there involving a police station. And apparently it's starting to draw the general population in. It's not just the police and the hostage takers anymore. Apparently activists are now building their own barricade in front of the police cordon. So that could explode. The whole world is on the verge of a global revolution against money junkies everywhere, which I think would be a good thing. Now, the other day we were talking about how deserters from the Ukrainian forces were revealing that there was a NATO-Ukraine plan for a large-scale offensive against the Donbass. And now we're getting confirmation it's underway. This is from Kaahumanu.com. Ukrainian forces prepare a large-scale provocation on the contact line. And they're doing it in order to justify their own violations of the Minsk agreements. This was announced by the representative of the operational command of the DNI. Everybody knows where we're going. Another story that came out of Prison Planet. Russian citizens are preparing for a real war. They're starting to stock up on essential supplies, salt, matches, things like that, because they know where this is going. Apparently in Russia, everybody's talking about the potential for a coming war. And a war with Russia is a big mistake. It's inevitably going to go nuclear. because the United States is militarily drawn down after, 13, 14 years of wars and coup d'etats and drone strikes in all these countries. They're running out of materiel. We had that report, I think, 3 weeks ago, where soldiers on the front lines do not have enough ammunition. They don't have all the necessary equipment. They're running short. All of the weapons are starting to wear out. Weapons are not built to last the way a car or a truck is, because the expectation is when they go into combat, their life expectancy is measured in hours. Why build them to last for 10 years? And they don't. They fall apart very, very quickly. And so the U.S. is worn down militarily. And to get into a full-on frontline war with Russia and or China is ridiculous, because it's at the point where the U.S. government finally acknowledges they cannot win a conventional war against Russia. That's when they'll bring out the nuclear weapons. And the wild card in all this mess, of course, are those B-61 nuclear bombs currently surrounded by Turkey's forces at that air base. And those can be dialed up to 340 kilotons each. They're considered tactical weapons, but they're far more powerful than the weapons that destroyed the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Meanwhile, Russia and China are signaling that they're going to broaden and deepen their ties. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is saying Russia and China are moving closer together, economically and in all probability militarily. Because I think Russia and China understand that if they are joined together, they are a force that hopefully will back the United States' aggression back down before this situation gets totally out of hand. Meanwhile, along with the obvious provocations taking place in Ukraine, the U.S. is continuing to rattle their sabers down there in the South China Sea. Washington has announced they're going to continue their operations in the South China Sea, their freedom of navigation exercises to protect their rights to sail anywhere they want on international waters. China's never challenged that. All China has said is, these islands are our property, they always have been along, and we don't recognize the Hague's authority to arbitrarily take them away from us and give them to somebody else. And here's where it gets a little bit interesting. Somebody did a video showing that in the United States Library of Congress, there are documents going back hundreds of years proving that those islands have been considered Chinese territory all along. It's like when Israel says there was never any such thing as Palestine, and you go back to the historical documents, oh, there's Palestine, and there's Palestine, and there's Palestine, and there's Palestine. Same thing here. The U.S. is trying to convince you China doesn't own those islands. And yet in the U.S. Library of Congress, they have the documents that say, yeah, this is Chinese territory. And it's been seen as Chinese territory for hundreds of years, even before the Cairo Declaration. At the end of World War II, the U.S. government signed the Cairo Declaration saying, yes, these islands are the property of China. Japan stole them during World War II. And the U.S., in that Cairo Declaration, said China gets them back. This is just an attempt to provoke conflict with China, because the U.S. government is desperate for a war. They are absolutely convinced if they can get a shooting war going with Russia or China, that we, the American people, are going to forget all about the corruption and the crime and the economic hardship and the NSA spying on us all and the phony terror attacks and Hillary's email and spying and all the rest. We'll forget all about that overnight, throw a snappy salute at the flag, and fling our money and our children onto the designated enemy's bayonets. And it's not going to happen, because the American people are wise to how these wars get created. And the U.S. government has lost the trust and confidence of the American people. And they did it to themselves. I know there's a lot of politicians running around and saying, it's the fault of that gosh darn internet that the people don't trust us anymore. No, it's the fault of politicians who lie after lie after lie to the American people. Torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, Spanish mine in Havana Harbor. The Lusitania wasn't carrying weapons, honest, trust us, we wouldn't lie to you. Pearl Harbor was a sneak attack. Really, we had no idea they were coming. Saddam has nuclear weapons. Assad has sarin gas. Saudi Arabia did 9/11. When you lie on an epic scale to the people like that, sooner or later, the people are going to stop listening. And it's the fault of those who broke that trust with the lies. It's not the fault of the internet or the independent media. We're doing the job an independent media is supposed to do, act as a watchdog on government wrongdoing. That's why the Founding Fathers created that First Amendment, to allow people and the media of the day to point out where the government is behaving badly without fear of reprisal. That's why that's in there. Now, Russia has put Black Lives Matter on their international list of terrorist groups, including all those who are funding them, Mr. Soros. And they should be on the American list, because they're out there openly saying if Donald Trump wins the presidency, they will try to overthrow the United States government. That, to me, sounds like a terrorist group. Israel is still out there trying to arm twist Obama to not sell any more advanced warplanes to Israel's neighbors in the Gulf because they'll wind up in terrorist hands. And Netanyahu's out there saying, you will not sell those planes to other nations. You will give those planes to us free, or I'll tell the world who really did 9/11. It's kind of the way he operates out there. Apparently, that 3.7 magnitude earthquake off of Florida may have been caused by a U.S. Navy test, which had to obviously have had a huge wallop. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And apparently, the Navy was off the coast of Florida, and they set off an underwater explosion of some magnitude to test the seaworthiness of a new U.S. Navy vessel. And they're going to release an official statement later this week. And the question is, was this explosion really so powerful that it registered as a 3.7 magnitude earthquake? Or did it actually trigger a quake? Now, the area where it happened is not known to be seismically active. So, pardon me for being winded. I had to do something on the commercial break. Turning to the economy, Deutsche Bank derivatives risk Europe Italian banks to crash first. And we're seeing articles like this one over in the Express in UK. Italy will destroy the European Union. They're in serious trouble. All the banks are. And all the quantitative easing and the bailouts and the negative interest rates don't work anymore. They've run out of tricks to keep the economy looking at some semblance of a functioning economic system. Because it's a Ponzi scheme. All private central banks are Ponzi schemes, and all Ponzi schemes eventually collapse. And that's where we're headed. Now, over at HSBC, they've cut 87,000 jobs. Remember, HSBC was the bank which was making all kinds of money, laundering drug money for drug criminals. And still they couldn't make it. We'll be getting back to them in a little bit here. Here's an article coming out of Investment Watch blog. American workers are skipping hard-earned vacation time in order to meet their bills, which increases the risk for stress-related diseases such as heart attacks and anxiety. And that is an issue. Now, if you look at Japan, where they have an incredible work ethic, and the Japanese pride themselves on working long and working hard, they suffer for it physically and mentally, high suicide rate. As opposed to looking at, for example, France, where everybody pretty much takes the month of August off, and they're much more relaxed. They don't have these work-related health issues. But the attitude here in the United States government is work them until they drop. Put them under such financial stress they won't even take the vacation time their contract says they're entitled to. Over in Great Britain, pardon me, their middle class is becoming the new poor as their economy declines. They're getting out of the EU just in time. In fact, they may be accelerating it. Article coming out of RINF.com. Prime Minister Theresa May is saying we're not planning to trigger Article 50 this year, but that could change if things start to fall apart. Now, over at the International Monetary Fund, they're now admitting they got it wrong with all the doom and gloom warnings about the British economy after the Brexit. And their actual projections are showing that after Britain leaves the EU, their economy is likely to grow faster than Germany and France. And they're already making deals around the Commonwealth. They're actually going to be much better off without that EU, and that contagion will spread. We've got to take a break for top of the hour station identification. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And let's see, let's get that out of the way here. Now, over in the European Union, the success of the Brexit referendum is having repercussions already. And you'll probably remember a while back, I had this statement I used to put out over the air. The fastest way to bring down a dictatorship is to force them to act like one where everybody can see it. And the European Union is now doing that. Members of the European Parliament are now demanding a dictatorial ban on all the member nations of the EU opting out of EU rules. The attitude now is, we control you. You have no more authority or sovereignty inside your own country. You're no more than Rhode Island to Washington, D.C. And this is going to accelerate the Euroscepticism. Because remember, the European Union was sold to the people of Europe only as a trading bloc. That was it. Open borders, free trade, that was going to be it. And Brussels has turned into this all-consuming, centralized, power-mad tyrant. Now, a member of the Dutch Parliament is at the Republican National Convention and was interviewed and was basically telling Trump's supporters the European Union is collapsing due to the open borders. And this is where it gets kind of weird. The borders are starting to close, but it's too little too late. Europe has been loaded up with millions and millions of these refugees, many of whom do not have skills that fit into that society. Many of them are criminal. Many of them carrying contagious diseases. Certainly seem to be a lot of them predisposed to attack the women around them. And that's another reason this whole blend everybody together agenda failed. Because in order to take two societies and merge them together seamlessly, the people in those societies must have skills that fit the needs of those societies. And the illegal immigrants coming across the border into the United States of America do not have the job skills required by the American job market, if we actually had jobs. And the same thing applies to Europe. Those refugees coming on in to Europe do not have the work skills that Europe's industries need. And that's another way that this whole idea just failed miserably. It wasn't thought all the way through. Somebody just got it into their head, well, we're going to blend all the world's people together and they'll sit around and hold hands and sing Kumbaya and we'll have our global government. Not working out very well. Now, over in Great Britain, the House of Commons is getting ready to debate a motion on holding Tony Blair in contempt of Parliament for his lying of Great Britain into the war in Iraq. They're going to do a collective wag of the finger at him. And by golly, that'll teach phony Tony not to lie the nation into wars of conquest, to be held in contempt of Parliament. Oh my goodness, what a terrible thing that is. Now, the other day we were talking about how the families of British troops who were killed in Iraq are going to file a private legal action against Tony Blair, which they're allowed to do in Britain. Here in the United States, we lost our right to file our own criminal charges against people in government back in 1981. But the Brits still have it. And they put out a crowdfunding webpage to raise money for the legal costs of taking Tony Blair to court. They raised £70,000 in one single day. And that is the measure of the anger and the rage among the British subjects after that Chilcot report. The Chilcot report really didn't reveal anything. It simply confirmed and validated what everybody already knew. From the dodgy dossier to the Downing Street memo, the evidence was out there all along. We were lied into a pointless war of conquest. Our children were killed and crippled for the profits of large corporations. And we need to understand and accept that's exactly what's been going on here. Now, I mentioned we were going to get back to HSBC. Finally, it looks like some criminal charges against actual executives are starting to happen. Federal agents grabbed an HSBC Holdings executive at Kennedy Airport. He was getting ready to fly out of New York, and they arrested him for alleged fraud involving currency trading. And this is an escalation of the Justice Department's 3-year investigation into foreign exchange rigging at global banks. Now, why is this happening? Well, it could be because of the embarrassing connections between Loretta Lynch and HSBC and James Comey and HSBC. And they're going to slap HSBC around to say, see, our past associations don't keep us from doing our job. Maybe. Because this seems to be coming from lower down. And this may be the beginning of a revolt within the ranks. Because arresting this guy, Mark Johnson, HSBC's global head of foreign exchange trading in London, and he appeared in court apparently just today. This could open a real can of worms for Lynch and Comey, and if they're brought down in the scandal, then Hillary's guardians are gone. Now, I'm going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates for rejoining our network. We're talking about HSBC, where one of their directors has been arrested in New York, appeared in court, right now, on fraud involving foreign exchange. And this could be a real problem for Attorney General Loretta Lynch, who was U.S. Attorney for New York, that arranged that sweetheart deal where HSBC avoided prosecution and jail time in exchange for a small payment, which amounted to about 5 weeks of their profits. Now, a member of the board of HSBC when all this drug money laundering was going on was James Comey, who's now head of the FBI. And if you're wondering how that could possibly come about, I invite you to look up the word narcocracy, because that is exactly what we have. It's like I said before, during Prohibition, those who were trading in the illicit substances made enough money to buy their way to the highest levels of the U.S. government. During the war on drugs, we're seeing a repeat. Those who trade in the illicit substances have enough money to buy their way to the top of the U.S. government. It's happening all over again. Now, apparently the latest wrinkle in the immigration situation over in Europe is Swedish women are now being told by the government of Sweden that they must wear headscarves in order to avoid being raped. Now, that's exactly the wrong way to go about it. You shouldn't reshape your culture based on the incoming refugees or immigrants. It is their responsibility to adapt to your culture and language. President Theodore Roosevelt said as much. You're welcome to come to the United States and be an American citizen, but it means being an American citizen and learning to live in America and get along in America and communicate with Americans. Don't come here across the border and demand we change our country to look like the one you just left, because if it was all that great to begin with, you wouldn't have left it, would you? Now, over in Nebraska, they have passed a new law that ends policing for profit using asset forfeiture. And the state can no longer take property without a criminal conviction. And remember, civil forfeiture was originally supposed to work against the guilty. If somebody was convicted of a crime, you could take all their wealth away from them. That's what it was supposed to do. Instead, police departments found it as an instant source of money. And they just started taking money from law-abiding citizens who were not convicted of any crime. You could have your car, your house, your bank account taken by the police merely if they think you're acting suspicious. We were talking the other day about this woman at Bank of America where the teller was inquisiting her. You know, where'd the money come from? What do you want the money for? It's none of your business. It's my money. And they froze her account. And it really is out of control. In fact, we put a video up at WhatReallyHappened.com about just how out of control this really is. U.S. government now confiscating homes, cars, and assets. And apparently a big champion of civil forfeiture was U.S. Attorney for New York, Loretta Lynch, now our Attorney General, who oversaw the stealing of $110 million worth of property from American citizens who were never charged with a crime. But, of course, Hillary gets a pass here because even if she was selling U.S. secrets to other countries for profit, everybody else did it, so we're going to let them go. We live in a nation that punishes the innocent and protects the guilty. Doesn't sound like a really good government, does it? And when you realize that government is the most expensive thing you'll ever be forced to pay, you got to ask, are you getting value for money? You spend more on government than you do on your home, on your food, on your car, on your children's education, on your health care. And that government you've been forced to pay for is out there punishing innocent people and protecting criminals. What we need is a cash for clunkers program for the U.S. government. We take our old, bloated, malfunctioning, inefficient government, we take it over to the junkyard, we put it in that big machine, and we crunch it down to a solid coffee table-sized cube. And then every American citizen gets a check for $50,000 with which to buy a new, smaller, more efficient, better behaving government. I think that's what we need right now. Cash for clunkers. Great idea. Its time has come. Now, we talked about this yesterday, but I'm going to come back and talk about it a little bit again. Over in the Bundy case, and this is being reported in the Las Vegas Review-Journal, U.S. Federal Judge Peggy Lean, without the benefit of a public hearing, has issued a court order that none of the government's information or evidence used to convict the Bundys be made public. And Lean is justifying the decision, citing that revelation of this information might lead to death threats against prosecutors. Well, what's in there? Because if the government was following the letter of the law, then why would you be worried about letting it out? And very clearly, something is being hidden here about the behavior of the Bureau of Land Management. And as I mentioned before, we had that big stink over the Bureau of Land Management grabbing land, EPA grabbing land, which they are not allowed to do under the Enclave Clause of the Constitution. And they're not grabbing all this land for environmental reasons. They're grabbing it for greed. We added 2 new stories to our Epic of Clinton's Mess, both of them involving land grabs. One was called Utah Gate. That was when Bill Clinton declared the Grand Staircase Escalade Monument and locked Utah off from its old low sulfur coal deposits, forcing American companies to buy coal from Bill Clinton's campaign donors in Indonesia. That was one scandal. And then there's Uranium Gate, where they had that standoff up there in Oregon, where the Bureau of Land Management was trying to kick these ranchers off their land because it had already been leased to a Russian uranium mining company, apparently with the permission of Hillary Clinton's State Department. We just need to get those rightful owners off the land, and everything's going to be good here. Now, I want to do a little bit of a flashback to 9/11. Because when 9/11 happened, they came on out with this list of, these are the suspects, they're Saudis, and they're this, and they're that, and then, of course, one of them turned out to be a pilot with the Saudi National Airlines. He was still alive after this was all over, and sued the United States government for defamation, and he won. And in September 2002, then FBI Director Robert Mueller came on out and admitted on CNN there is no legal proof to prove the identities of whoever was on those airplanes. He came on out and said that published list of Saudi hijackers was a fiction. It was all stolen identities to frame somebody. And the corporate media's response was, oh, okay, that's nice. There was never any follow-up. No questions. It was dead silence, and then the story went away. And today, the corporate media still, when they talk about 9/11, they put up that same bunch of faces, which Mueller said, we don't know that's who was on the airplane. In the case of one of the crashed airplanes, DNA analysis of the remains failed to find anybody of Middle Eastern DNA anywhere on there. And yet, we're being told that we should trust that recently declassified 28 pages as gospel proof that Saudi Arabia was behind 9/11. And first of all, those 28 pages says no such thing. It's rumor and innuendo. May have been connected, might have been funded. We think maybe could have this. And everybody who's out there trying to scream that these 28 pages prove Saudi Arabia did 9/11 are hoping you haven't actually read it. And here's where it gets really interesting, because a video has surfaced from 2003 showing the then Saudi foreign minister demanding these 28 pages be declassified, because even back then it was being wagged around that, oh, Saudi Arabia did 9/11, these pages would prove it, it's just a shame it's been classified. And the Saudi foreign minister said, go ahead and declassify it. Let the world decide. Now, even the White House has come on out and said that, yeah, there is no actual evidence of Saudi involvement in 9/11. And remember, yesterday I told you why that makes perfect sense. Saudi Arabia has made a vast fortune off that U.S. petrodollar deal. They do not want to kill the goose that's laying that golden egg, especially with their own economy under stress right now from that oil price war. Saudi Arabia is not going to attack the United States because that would give the United States the excuse to seize all of Saudi Arabia's money in this country, which is a considerable sum. And if for whatever reason Saudi Arabia wanted to hurt the United States of America, they don't need to crash planes into skyscrapers to do it. They just got to take their money back. And our economic system is so fragile, it would shatter. And it would be perfectly legal for Saudi Arabia to do it. This is just another shifting of the blame. First it was Afghanistan did 9/11. Oh, let's bomb Afghanistan. Whoops, we were wrong. It was Iraq did 9/11. Oh, let's go bomb Iraq and wreck the place. And oops, we were wrong. Now it's Saudi Arabia. Then it'll be Qatar. Then it'll be Monaco. And then it'll be Australia. And then it'll be Pittsburgh. Who knows who they're going to blame for 9/11 next, followed by drone strikes and bombs. Now, for me, there are two major giveaways about 9/11. And as we get closer to the anniversary, we'll go into it in a little more depth. The first is the Carl Cameron 4-part story on Fox News about the Israeli spy ring that was uncovered just before 9/11. The largest foreign spy operation in U.S. history, spying on Americans for Israel. And some of these guys were arrested when they were seen cheering and clapping and dancing and high-fiving as the World Trade Towers came crashing down. And the police arrested them. 3 of them turned out to be Mossad agents, and the U.S. just very quietly shipped them back to Israel. Then there's Odaigo, an Israeli-owned company with offices in New York near the World Trade Center. They got an advance warning before the airplanes involved in 9/11 had even left the runway. They even had the originating IP of the message. They gave it to the FBI, never heard from again. And then you have that weird situation of George Bush sitting in that school in Sarasota, Florida, and the Secret Service doing nothing at all. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And getting on back to the news here, Judicial Watch has obtained a document in which apparently the FBI was checking out Omar Mateen. And the FBI informed the Florida Sheriff's Department in late 2013 Omar Mateen was not a terrorist and was no threat to go postal. And apparently the FBI and other documents showed that Mateen had lied to the FBI about claiming to be linked to the Boston bombing and Fort Hood and Al-Qaeda and the rest of it. It's just one of these poor losers who wanted to seem more important than he really was and said, oh, yes, I know terrorists and I know this and I know that. That stuff will come back to haunt you. But that was the FBI's actual assessment. That was the FBI's actual assessment. He was not a terrorist and he was not at risk of going postal. Apparently, Massachusetts is banning all sales of assault weapons as of tomorrow. And again, this is about disarming the American people. Because assault weapons are hardly used for anything other than by the police. They're always used in the mass shootings because that's the target of the gun grabber agenda. The government is clearly becoming very afraid of the American people, especially after what's happening in all these other countries where the people are rising up and protesting. And again, it's not our fault. Decades of lying and corruption and theft, yeah, it's going to tick off any population. Go back to that Declaration of Independence. People are disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable. In other words, we understand that when you are in a society with a government, there's going to be a certain amount of bovine excrement coming from that government you're going to have to deal with. And it's a trade-off. You accept that maltreatment at the hands of the government in exchange for the benefits the government brings to your society. But when you reach a point where there are no benefits coming from that government, when it's not repairing the roads and keeping the rails running, when it's not keeping the utilities in good shape, when it can't even provide safe drinking water out of the faucet because it's too busy spending your money on Israel and Wall Street and the war machine, people do reach a breaking point. And I think the American people, I think people all over the world are at that breaking point. So the push is on to try and disarm the American people. And by the way, for those of you who are gun enthusiasts, it does look like this is the beginning of a trend. And so you might want to go to AR Outfitters, who's one of the advertisers on the radio show. I'm trying to get them to advertise on the website. And go ahead and get yourself a decent weapon to protect your house from the criminals. And I'm not encouraging anybody to go out and actually pull the trigger on anybody. But if we have 300 million Americans holding weapons, it might convince the government not to pull the triggers on us. AROutfitting.com. I did have that right. Okay, we're going to take a phone call. Alex in San Antonio. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. I was calling because yesterday you had a caller to talk about the United States Corporation. And I would say about 3 months ago, I was buying silver in Mexico. And I ran into another, I guess you could call them metal investors.
Yes.
And he was saying something about that the United States Corporation is actually the largest economy in the world because every one of us with a Social Security number is technically an employee of it. And this corporation creates its own money. Therefore, a lot of the stuff that we think...
Hang on a second. Alex, Okay, we're almost at a commercial break, and I'm going to have to let you go. But I have a question here. Under that theory, if we're all employees of the U.S. government, why are we having to pay them? That's my question.
I was gonna ask you.
Okay, well, I mean, obviously, there's something wrong with that theory. Thank you for the phone call, Alex. We got to let you go. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, over at INFOWARS, Joe Biggs is now reporting that the Department of Homeland Security has issued an alert for a stolen garbage truck out of concern that it could be used as a garbage truck bomb at the Republican National Convention. And obviously the concern is that those who do not want to let Donald Trump anywhere near the White House may resort to a terror attack to be blamed on ISIS. And obviously a garbage truck would have enough room for a considerable amount of explosives to be put inside. So we'll keep an eye on this story. Now, there's another story that's breaking. This is coming out of LiveLeak. Now, the other day we were talking about how the coup in Turkey was actually pushed up because the coup plotters, including apparently those NATO officers on that air base, found out that Erdogan knew they were coming. And now we're hearing that Erdogan got the warning of the impending coup from Russia. Now, where did Russia get that information? I don't know, maybe Hillary's email server. More seriously, remember there was that strange emergency meeting between John Kerry and Vladimir Putin just before this all went down. Now, normally when the U.S. is going to do something dramatic, they'll very quietly and privately tell other world leaders so they don't freak out and panic when things start happening. They'll already know what's going on. And maybe Putin or somebody near Putin who heard this decided Erdogan needed a heads up. Because it's certainly better for Russia if the coup fails than if it succeeds. And yes, Turkey is clearly pivoting toward Russia here. This is a major foreign policy whoopsie on the part of the United States government. But that seems to be the chain of events. Somehow, Russia knew the coup was going to happen. They may have gotten it from John Kerry. They may have gotten it someplace else. And they gave Erdogan a heads up. The coup plotters got wind of the heads up, advanced their timetable, and it all fell apart from there. Now, good news, maybe bad news for those of us living on the island of Oahu. The so-called Magnum PI mansion over in Waimanalo has been bought through a corporate cutout by the Obama family for $8.7 million, which is a heck of a trick on the president's salary. And so it looks like they may be flipping back and forth between Chicago, and whether they're going to live here all the time or not, we don't know. But the people over on the windward side of the island are not happy because every time the president is here, the Secret Service makes the roads an absolute nightmare. They're already a nightmare. According to the National Transportation Safety Board, or rather the Department of Highways, we have the worst traffic of any state in the United States, and it's been exacerbated by the construction of the light rail, and gridlock is now becoming a very common situation. And if the Obamas are taking up residency here, they're still going to be protected by the Secret Service, and things are going to be a little bit dicey, I think. But again, $8.7 million. And again, that's a good trick on the president's salary. Because the president's official salary isn't really all that much. And in theory, all of his personal wealth is locked up in a blind trust. Things that make you go, Now, getting on back to Malaysian Airlines 17, and the other day we were talking about how Russia has been accused of shooting down Flight 17 in a smear campaign all over the corporate media to where your average citizen who isn't really paying attention has just come to accept that that's a fact. Fox News told me Russia shot it down. It must be so. Even though the actual report from the international investigation said it was impossible to come to a conclusion. Now, there's another story coming out of RINF.com basically saying that the New York Times report on Malaysian Airlines Flight 17 committed a fraud by using an unsourced claim from an amateur report that claimed Russia faked satellite imagery of Ukrainian anti-aircraft missile batteries in eastern Ukraine to say that the Ukrainian batteries shot it down. So there was this amateur report that said what the New York Times wanted to hear, Russia's faking the satellite imagery, and the New York Times ran it as news, and they got caught. A lot of fakery and fraud in the corporate media. It's what they do. And more alert people are starting to realize how often a supposed on-the-scene report is actually a green screen shot. Now, getting on back to this situation with the police and attempting to rebrand them as victims deserving of our sympathy. That's going to be a hard sell. Apparently, over in Oklahoma, there was a police officer showed up in the middle of a birthday party for a 5-year-old boy. And the birthday party had just moved back into the house for cake and ice cream, and the cop showed up and shot the family's puppy 3 times in the front yard, in front of all the kids. And the puppy was just flopping over and kicking and gasping for air. And as it turns out, the police officer was serving a 10-year-old warrant on a man who did not live there, and just hauled off and shot the puppy dog dead. It is hard to view people like this as deserving of our sympathy. You can't handle a puppy? As Ron White would say, you got to be a real manly man to take out that 9mm and blow a little puppy dog away. All right, let's grab a phone call. DJ in Georgia. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine.
Okay, hey, yep. The comment that I wanted to make was about the attempted coup in Turkey.
Yes.
And a lot of people would have to go back to November of last year when that fighter plane was downed over Syria, and they said they said that it was Turkey that did it, but a lot of people claim that that was a CIA attempted, controlled fighter jet. And this time around, the Turkish media is blaming the CIA directly or the U.S. military in general for starting that coup.
Yeah, and by the way, the P is silent. It's coup. A coup is what you put chickens in. Erdogan is now out there saying that the Turkish pilots, he's acknowledging Turkey shot down the plane, and he's already apologized to Russia, but now he's saying that these Turkish pilots were working for this cleric, Gulen, who's still living in the United States of America. And so, yeah, he's trying to basically say the CIA shot that plane down to make Turkey look bad, which in the context of the time, no, because Turkey was working on the U.S. agenda regarding Syria. So, no, the CIA or Gulen would not have done that. But Erdogan is out there just making all these bizarre statements, and along with his obvious clampdown on Turkish society, he's starting to really show some mental instability, in my opinion.
Well, what about that fleet of naval ships that's headed towards Turkey right now? They said that there was a massive U.S. NATO fleet that was headed down that way to Turkey, and I think they're going to try to finish off the coup there.
It may very well be, but my impression was that those ships were supposedly on the way to be off the coast of Syria. I don't think the U.S., which is already looked at with suspicion regarding the coup, is going to just overtly launch a war against Turkey, which has been one of its staunchest allies in the region, because, again, the political costs outweigh the benefits in terms of destroying whatever other alliances the U.S. would have in the region. If the U.S. comes back for a second try, it's going to be a covert operation again.
I don't think he's useful anymore to the U.S. though. I mean,
oh, definitely not.
All along,
definitely not. He's pivoting to he's pivoting to Russia. He's pivoting to Iran. He's pivoting to China. The U.S. botched this one badly, and that's
the reason why he turned to Russia. That's because he apologized to Russia and Putin because he realized that he was set up and he was kind of going to get set up for this coup coming down. And I think I don't think they're finished with Turkey yet. I think they're going to actually finish him off and get a new puppet in there.
I agree with that, but I don't think it's going to be a full frontal invasion of Turkey because that would destroy every other alliance the U.S. has around the world to see them so overtly attack somebody who at least nominally is still an ally and an asset. If they come back for him again, it will be another covert effort, but Erdogan is locking his society down so tight that's going to be very, very difficult. Now, they're still trying to make a big deal over these missing Turkish ships and helicopters, and Turkish airplanes are out there flying around Greece to make sure that these Turkish ships aren't turning themselves into Greece to save their lives. I think most of them are actually up in the Baltic in that Operation Seabreeze because it was in the news. Sea and air forces from Turkey are taking part in that exercise, and I think that's probably where most of these so-called missing ships and helicopters happen to be.
There's one more wrench in this story, though, Mike.
Yes.
They've got, remember, they stashed nuclear weapons in Turkey, too. And
yes.
the U.S. is possibly trying to get those back, what I heard, too.
Well, of course the U.S. wants to get them back, and they cannot. The base is now cut off. There's a no-fly zone over it, which is being enforced by the Turkish Air Force. And they're running on emergency generators there, and there are these 50 of the B-61 tactical nuclear weapons. They have a maximum yield of 340 kilotons, and right now Erdogan has the base surrounded, which means he has those weapons surrounded. We have these nuclear weapons that are now outside the control of the U.S. chain of command, and that's making people very, very nervous. If Erdogan were to get it into his head to seize those weapons, overnight he becomes a nuclear power in the region equal to Israel.
Yeah, and I think that's another reason why the U.S. would, like you said, covertly or overtly support another attempt, because this guy, he botched it up. I mean, it was an amateur hour, but I mean, he really did a number on the U.S. I mean, everything that he was supposed to do, get ISIS in there, take over Iraq and all that stuff. I mean, he did everything wrong, and I think he's setting himself up.
No, I disagree. He didn't do everything right. He made a lot of mistakes. So did the U.S. Okay, and but the real issue is, if he seizes those nuclear weapons, it's only a matter of time before they can get past the fail-safe systems. If they have their hands on the weapons, all those safety interlock systems are to protect against accidental or unauthorized detonation, but they always assume the physical weapon itself is still under the control of the U.S. military. So he can have his engineers, and if he can, then if the U.S. tries a direct, full-on invasion of Turkey, Erdogan might just go ahead and nuke that American fleet. And that's a chance I don't think the U.S. wants to take at this point, because then everything is going to uncork everywhere.
Wow. All right, well, thanks, Mike. That's all I had right now, so appreciate it, man.
Thank you very much. Covert, second try at Erdogan? Absolutely. Overt invasion of Turkey? No. The political costs outweigh the benefits. Let's go to George in Montana. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. Listen, back to the police matter. There was some police chief a few days back said he can't imagine what police have ever done to deserve being shot at and treated like this. Well, how about this? They shoot our dogs. They rob us at roadside.
Yeah.
They want to track us with our cell phones. And the police culture that's been allowed to develop now assures that only psychopaths will apply for the job. These guys have every element of a foreign invading force.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, the Second Amendment and the true purpose of the Second Amendment really needs to be put to a test here. I know it's an uncomfortable discussion, and a lot of people will condemn me for bringing it up. But the right to bear arms is not for target sports or to hunt your dinner. Isn't this what it's for?
Yeah, the Second Amendment wasn't passed because the deer were coming. And,
yeah, right.
and
but could it have been passed because the police are here?
It was passed to hold any government in check that was becoming abusive, whether it's the city, state, county, or federal government. It's about preserving the security of a free state. Now, nobody wants a bloody free-for-all in the streets of America. But when you have one side that's armed and another side that's not, there's going to be abuse and tyranny. We saw that in Nazi Germany. And if you take a very close look at all this police abuse that's going on, it tends to focus in the areas with maximum gun control. Okay? Now, I would like to see every single American have a military-style weapon like they do in Switzerland. Not because I want everybody shooting everybody, but because if you have arms on both sides, then there's a very good reason to not pull the trigger to begin with. And that is the whole point of deterrence. I want to see, let me finish. I want to see the American people armed not to start an American revolution, but to prevent one.
With respect to the Second Amendment, we have done everything that we're supposed to do to straighten out the cops, and all the systems they give us have failed.
Yes.
They always find themselves justified. And with the Second Amendment, Mike, at some point you have to acknowledge that there's a threshold, and we need to ask, have we crossed that threshold? I think we've crossed it a long time ago, and our founding fathers are rolling over in our graves, asking why they even gave us the Second Amendment if we haven't used it by now.
Well, my assessment right now is it would be foolish to initiate any kind of a violent uprising against the government, because in the court of world opinion, sympathy is going to fall on the side that does not start the hostilities. And so it's to our benefit to let the government draw first blood, and yes, I understand the police have already done that. I personally don't think the general American population are ready for any kind of a violent confrontation, but we know the U.S. government sure is. They're prepared for it. And if there is one thing the U.S. government does really well, it's kill people. And so it's a foolish idea to be encouraging any kind of a violent revolution. I'm in favor of encouraging deterrence. I'm in favor of balancing the force on both sides. The United States Supreme Court, when they ruled in United States versus Miller, said the Second Amendment gives the American people the same weapons as the uniformed forces because the intention of the Second Amendment was for the American people to be their own military force equal to that of the government. Okay? So thank you very much for the phone call. We got to let you go. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to go right back to the phone. Scott in California, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Hey, hello, Michael. I just finished reading a book titled Finelli and Vince, and it's about the murder of Vince Foster. I got to the end of the book, and they had a picture of his tombstone. Today's the anniversary of the murder, and I recall you saying in the past that's what got you fired up.
Well, I wasn't fired up on the day of the murder itself. It was basically after the White House leaked that photo of the hand and the gun, and I just saw it. And being that my business back then was visual effects for film and TV, the instant I saw the picture, I knew it was a staged shot. And so I just started talking about it, see something, say something, and that's when my career in Hollywood evaporated.
Yeah. Boy. Anyway, that was I was really impressed with the contents of the book, but that guy is a great writer with the clarity of his writing. And then a comment on that Second Amendment that came up a little bit earlier. Judge Martin Jenkins, Ninth Circuit, San Francisco, fairly recent, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, he said, the purpose of the Second Amendment is to enable the American people to resist government tyranny, period.
And he's paraphrasing some of the Founding Fathers, because if you go back to the ancillary writings of the Founding Fathers surrounding the making of the Bill of Rights, they're all saying the same thing. The whole point of the Second Amendment is to give the government a reason to leave the people alone. And
I like that.
Yeah, that's basically it. And what's really interesting is it's talking about military weapons. The Second Amendment was not about hunting weapons or target weapons, because when the Bill of Rights was being written, being able to hunt was indispensable, especially during the winter months. You could not survive without a hunting weapon. And so what the Second Amendment was talking about was military-grade weapons to protect the security of a free state. And so there's no question, and that, of course, was upheld by the United States Supreme Court in United States versus Miller.
Yep. Okay, Michael, thanks. Anyway, July 20th, Vince Foster's murder anniversary. Talk to you later.
All right, thank you very much as well. And we're going to switch over to Alan in California. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. I'm not sure if I heard you talk about it or not, but I don't think so. At the convention, I think the best, most powerful speech so far has been the Patricia Smith.
Yes.
Happened to hear her speech?
Yes, I did, and it's caused tremendous consternation and gnashing of teeth and wailing and tearing of hair over at the Hillary Clinton campaign, where that one writer at GQ magazine literally tweeted out how much he wanted to kill Pat Smith. The Hillary campaign, I think, belatedly is coming to the realization that no, the American people are not going to be forgetting all of Hillary's crimes and indiscretions. Anyway, listen, Alan, we got to take a break for the top of our station identification. Stay on the line. I'm going to come right back to you. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, and we're talking with Alan in California about the convention. Oh, Alan apparently has dropped the line. Now, stepping on back to that earlier phone call about the guy who called in expressing his frustration that when he's out on social media, it just seems frustrating. There are so many people who support Hillary Clinton no matter what she did. And I was saying they're paid shills. And in some cases, they're not even real human beings. Because an audit of Hillary Clinton's main Twitter feed shows 41% of the followers are not real human beings. They're automated systems, and all they do is go on out there and they react to keywords and say, oh, Hillary didn't do this, Hillary didn't do that. It's all a vast right-wing conspiracy. It's all a plot because you hate women and blah, 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 blah. It's all an illusion. Her support is all a crafted illusion. I know she's got a personality cult around her who want her to be president just because they want a woman as president, and they don't care whether she can do the job or not. They don't even care if she'd turn the country into a dictatorship. It's time for a woman president. Well, a lot of people voted Obama into the White House because it was time for a black president, and look what that got us. Obamacare, more wars, NSA spying, a ruined economy. I think it's time we raise our standards and not choose presidents based on their appearance and gender and color. Let's find somebody who can do the job, or at least choose somebody who's capable of the least amount of harm. It really is absurd. But Hillary Clinton's illusion of support is that. It's a bought and paid for manufactured illusion. And just like these lawsuits about fraud during the primary were set off by the disparity between paper count precincts and machine count precincts, we look at the corporate media polls which claim Hillary and Trump are tied versus online polls that consistently put Donald Trump way ahead. We know those corporate media polls are not to be trusted any more than when the corporate media told us Saddam had nuclear weapons. Because that's what corporate media's job is. That's what they're paid those millions of dollars to do, to get you to believe what the politicians and corporations want you to believe. Vaccines are safe. GMO is good for you. Humans are warming the world. Assad has poison gas. Hillary is great as president. That's their job. And Hillary, because of that foundation and all that untraceable money, she's got whatever money she needs to spend to create this illusion of broad-based support. There is one genuine area of support, I would suspect, and that would be all the drug dealers in this country, because she's got the keys to the big money laundry, doesn't she? Or at least that's the appearance. I mean, HSBC, laundering drug money, HSBC tangled in with the Clinton Foundation, And let's face it, Bill and Hillary Clinton's careers started with the CIA's Iran-Contra gun and drug running operation out of Arkansas down to Nicaragua. It's been part of their political life all along. And no, the American people aren't going to forget her past indiscretions or those of her husband. Now, getting on to some science news, over at Fukushima, TEPCO has finally admitted the ice wall is not stopping Fukushima #1 groundwater. Remember that much hyped ice wall? We're going to set up pipes and we're going to have a wall of solid ice at the #1 nuclear power plant. And that will keep the water contained. And actually, they're now admitting, no, it isn't working. And I mention that because when they first proposed that idea, I mentioned right here on the radio show and on the website, this can't be made to work. This is something they're doing just to look like they're trying to do something. But given the heat being generated by the spontaneous fission down there underneath those ruined reactors, they were dealing with a lot of heated water, which they have acknowledged. There's a tremendous amount of heat down there. So even if by some miracle that ice wall originally formed an impermeable boundary, it wasn't going to stay that way. And the ice wall can only go down so far. It can't go underneath. And they're just a few feet above the water table. They're at the edge of the ocean, and there's nothing they can do to stop it. It's a major, major problem. Now they're talking about a Chernobyl-like sarcophagus. They're just going to cover over the entire thing in a giant white cocoon, with TEPCO painted across the top of it, turn it into a tourist attraction or something. But again, the problem with that is that the subterranean area, it's wide open there. We're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates rejoining our network. We're talking about the Fukushima Daiichi Power Station and the revelation that TEPCO has finally admitted after all this time that the ice wall that they created to try and prevent contaminated water from the reactors from getting into the groundwater and out to the ocean is not working. And when they first proposed the idea, I didn't think it had any chance of working anyway. But it appears to be something they did it just to look like they were trying to solve the problem, as opposed to just sitting there and saying, I don't have an idea what to do. Well, we got to look like we're doing something. Okay, we'll get a voodoo doctor in there to make the radiation disappear or something. And now they're talking about a giant sarcophagus, a cover over the whole mess, which will not prevent the radiation from leaking out through the bottom, sintering on out through the sand until it leaches into the ocean water. They really messed this one up, didn't they? And I want to go back to what we were talking about, this documentary 0 Days, about the discovery and tracking down of the Stuxnet cyber weapon. And it's an interesting documentary. It's got a very pro-Israel, anti-Iran bias, but once you filter that out, it's a very good technical analysis of how Stuxnet was working and how it did what it did, and how there were actually several versions of it. It was only the last one that was made too aggressive, and it called attention to itself, and that's when the world twigged onto this thing. Now, we know that the Stuxnet virus was in computers all around the Fukushima Daiichi power station at the time of the quake and tsunami. And we also know that the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant was using the exact same type of Siemens programmable controllers that Stuxnet was designed to interfere with. We also know that when the quake and tsunami hit, many of those automated emergency systems did not perform the way they were supposed to. And that's why we've got this mess on our hands. Now, this many years removed, and with all that radiation around there, I would be very surprised if the memories on those PLCs are still intact. But it would have been an interesting exercise to grab one of those and do an analysis on the software that's inside it because it may be that this Stuxnet virus, in its haste to inflict Israel's will on Iran's nuclear program, may have taken a minor calamity and turned it into an absolute catastrophe. And that's one of the alarming things about these true believer war hawks. They don't care what their actions do. They just have to achieve the goal. We have to achieve the goal. And anybody who gets hurt off to the side, well, it's not really my problem. Anything's going to be a long-term consequence of what they're doing, I'll be retired by then. We see a lot of that here in Oahu. At the end of World War II, they just dumped a bunch of munitions, including chemical weapons, onto the floor of the Pacific Ocean. If you look at the maritime charts, it's marked. Munitions dumping zone, do not use bottom drag nets here, because you might bring up something that you don't want to bring on up. Sooner or later, those drums of those chemical weapons are going to corrode through. But the people who made that decision, they could care less. They had won the war. Let's just tidy up and have a party. The people who were promoting fracking weren't interested in the possible negative environmental and health consequences. They're just there to make the money. The people who cut the safety corners on nuclear reactors didn't care what's going to happen when we have a Fukushima meltdown. They just want their stockholders' checks. Same thing with the Minerals Management Service and the Deepwater Horizon, or the Food and Drug Administration and all the toxic chemicals that are in our food and drugs. Our entire social system has become dominated by that need to get more of those pieces of paper and colored ink to keep the bankers happy. If we don't keep the bankers happy, they'll do bad things to us. So we'll just turn a blind eye to doing bad things to our fellow human beings as long as we're getting the pieces of paper with colored ink. Let's go to the phones here. Rick in Reno, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thanks, Mike. I was just talking with my son last night about the necessity of a class action lawsuit against TEPCO, against the Japanese government, against the United States government, against Israel, for the Fukushima radiation and contamination disaster, the decimation of the North Pacific, the massive cancers afflicting Japanese and now West Coast.
And the birth defects. And the birth defects.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, it's an absolute...
That's all I have, Mike.
Yeah, well, I agree. And unfortunately, at least as far as the United States is concerned, these large corporations are indemnified. The vaccine makers are indemnified against the harm their vaccines cause. We have to go over to the Vaccine Injuries Court, which is, for the most part, taxpayer funded. We'd like to be able to sue the fracking industry over all the harm that they are causing. And their official stance is it's all in your head. And we have a totally corrupted government that is fully on the side of corporate interest. And that is the classic definition of fascism. So it's almost like we're in a really bad science fiction movie. We're on the verge of a world war for a planet that's already been rendered virtually worthless between radioactive accidents and petrochemical leaks. Not to mention the damage from tinkering with DNA. And I'm still very concerned about that epicite gene, the one that if you eat it, it renders you incapable of having children. Because if that gets into the wild and infects all of the corn, you're looking at a major extinction level event, not to mention the social upheaval when a major source of food is now off limits. So it's pretty ugly stuff. Anyway, Rick, anything else? Okay, well, we're going to let Rick go. Thank you very much for the phone call here. Now then, over in Indonesia, there is a big stink, and there ought to be. Indonesian President Joko Widodo is trying to calm the situation down. Apparently, it's now become public knowledge that 4 criminal syndicates have been producing counterfeit vaccines throughout Jakarta and Java for 13 years. They got away with this for 13 years. And it's not just vaccines. When I was going through another issue entirely, I was looking at counterfeit medications, and Indonesia is a major producer of counterfeit medications that'll be labeled as having whatever, and in many cases will not have the actual active ingredient, because that would cost money. And in a couple of cases, there have been people who have been killed because of what they just put into the pill to make up the missing volume. And the reason that is an area of concern is because many U.S. drugstore chains import their medications from Indonesia, and there have been cases of these American drugstores being discovered to be selling counterfeit prescription medications. And the FDA is just looking the other way because, hey, the drugstores are making money and they're paying taxes, and that's all that really matters here. Now, there's a story over at Waking Times that raises a very, very good point. We're always being told we must be enraged at gun deaths. Oh, we must be enraged. It's just beyond tolerance there. And they come on out with this 30,000 gun deaths a year, not mentioning that most of those are suicides. And there are some accidents plus the police shootings. And the actual shootings in the commission of a crime, roughly 7% of the total. But why are we not getting that enraged about deaths caused by vaccines? Because we're certainly dealing with innocent victims here. Sometimes more than one. Because even though a lot of these vaccines now have on their packaging, this can kill your kid. When a kid dies, usually when they mix 6 or 8 of these things together in a single syringe and shoot the kid up, the first thing the doctor will turn around and tell the parents, you must have shaken your kid. This is classic shaken baby syndrome. And there have been parents who, after suffering the trauma of losing their baby, are being thrown in jail in order to protect the profits of the vaccine industries. Remember what I said before, value for money for government? When you have a government that is punishing the innocent people and protecting the guilty? This is another classic case. It's more profitable to punish the innocent parents and protect the guilty vaccine makers. Now, the other day I was talking about this overprevalence of antidepressants in the American culture and how it's time to start correlating that with violent behavior that does not necessarily culminate in death or suicide. And we had done one such study where we took a chart of the per capita usage of prescription antidepressants in the American people, and we overlaid it over the per capita incidence of domestic violence during the same time period, and we got a strong correlation. And so the question is out there, are we going to see more bar fights, road rage on these antidepressants? We know the guy who did the road rage thing in Nice was on antidepressants. And it's not just a problem here in the United States of America, because over in England, their healthcare system is spending $1 million a day on antidepressants for the British subjects, despite the research showing that A, they're not effective at dealing with depression, and B, there are some serious side effects. But they make money, and that's all that really matters. It makes money. That's all we're here to do, is make money off of you. That's why you're here, to give us the money. That's your proper place in the American society. All right, let's talk about computers. And earlier today, I was browsing a website, corporate website, and I got this big pop-up in front of me saying, we see that you are using an ad blocker. And really, you cannot appreciate our site unless you turn that ad blocker off. So, of course, I didn't turn the ad blocker off. And I have a message to the online advertising industry as a whole, and that includes the ones that we have at What Really Happened, and I had to fire 2 of them for behaving badly. The online advertising industry is out of control. They're creating very abusive, intrusive, hijacking type software. It's poorly written. It's sloppy, causes system crashes, and there is the epidemic of malvertising. where some of these ads are being used to plant malware on your system. And so my message is to the industry, you'd better start policing yourself. You'd better clean up your act, because until you do, we're going to keep our ad blockers in place. So stop putting up that little sign saying, you should turn off your ad blocker. No, it stays until we understand there is no risk at allowing those ads to pop up. After what I just went through from What Really Happened, and by the way, thanks to everybody who donated during our recent fundraiser, because that gave us the latitude to be able to cancel 2 of these advertisers. And they're already begging to come back, and I'm saying, no way. No way. You burn me once, you are gone. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show, and we're talking about computers, and we're talking about the out-of-control situation with the online advertising industry. And frankly, if I could figure out a way to dump all my CPM advertisers, I would. The banners are okay. You're safe with those things. But it is out of control. And I've been in communication with my advertisers, and their attitude is always, well, we're doing our best to filter these out. There are websites you can go to check an advertising URL to see if it's planting malware. It's just nobody's doing the due diligence, because they're all out there to make money, and they don't care what harm they may cause. And there seems to be this industry-wide attitude that they have inherited from the National Security Agency that your personal computers are somehow theirs to play with however they see fit. Which brings us to Microsoft. And apparently in a last desperate gasp to try and force Windows 7 and Windows 8.1 users to upgrade to Windows 10, Microsoft has released yet another patch that brings back the Get Windows 10 Nagster. You want Windows 10. You want Windows 10. Now remember, when this all started, I gave Windows 10 a fair opportunity. We took the laptop that supports Claire's church choir, which was running Windows 7, and we allowed it to upgrade to Windows 10. And it changed all the user settings, changed the passwords, wanted us to use her Microsoft account password, which means hackers already have half the information they need to brute force their way in. And then it erased all of the music files that have been on there from the Windows 7. Not put in the trash can. I'm talking about just blanked off the disk. And it was problem after problem after problem. So we exercised the option to revert to your previous operating system, which lasts for 30 days after you do the upgrade. If you don't revert after 30 days, that option goes away. The reversion is not 100% perfect. There's a lot of Windows 10 still in there, and it broke all kinds of interior stuff, to the point where finally we just had to throw that laptop away. There was no way to get it back into working condition. And we got another laptop for Claire's choir, and we're not letting it patch or upgrade anything. But Microsoft actually came out with a horrible, horrible product, and their attitude is, we're going to force you to make it, to take it and use it. Because what Microsoft and the entire industry is trying to do is transition to a subscription-based model for all software and services. You don't get to buy a license for whatever you're doing. You will rent it month to month to month. And once they have that model in place, they no longer have an incentive to develop better products. They don't need to. The money will pour in no matter what. They can license that same piece of software for 10 years into the future without having to make any improvements to it whatsoever. So there's another nag out there, and for those of you who are trying to protect your system from Tenzilla, I recommend GWX Control Panel. Just Google search that term. There's an installable version. There's a standalone version. I actually think the standalone version works better. I've got it on my little pocket flash drive that I have with me at all the times. And that will go through and make sure that the Windows 10 material is not lurking somewhere in your system ready to spring up and surprise you, because there have been a lot, in fact, there are even lawsuits already of individuals and companies who have come into work in the morning and all of a sudden all of their machines are on Windows 10, and they can't get their older applications to run. They can't get at their data. It's almost like being hit with ransomware. We got you now. You're now going to have to buy all updated versions of all your applications if you ever want to do anything again. I mean, Windows 10 NAGware actually meets Microsoft's own definition for malware. It really does. And part of the problem is Windows 10 is not the huge success they wanted it to be. New PC laptop sales have flatlined because people do not want Windows 10. And they are not coming anywhere near their expectations and projections. I mean, in a healthy economy, people are always going to say, yeah, I want the latest and the greatest. And, you know, I've had this wristwatch here for 8 months. It's time for a new one. This economy doesn't support that anymore. We got to take another break here. We got a caller waiting on the line. I'm going to take your call as soon as we come back from these words from our advertisers. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to go to the phones. Glenn in Philadelphia. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. Calling about computers and politics today. We'll do computers first here. I receive a lot of targeted advertising in my browser, banner ads and stuff, but it's for stuff I bought 2-3 months ago and don't need to repeat buying. So even their advertising is often a day late and $1 short.
Yeah, I see exactly the same thing. And, I'll buy something and immediately the ads are saying, well, here's more of the same. You know, how many chainsaws do I need? And it really is rather ridiculous here. It sounds really good. And let me share something with you because at the start of my computer animation career, I worked in advertising because all the way back then, only TV commercials had enough money to be able to do computer animation. It was still too expensive even for movies. And TV shows. And so a lot of the early work at Robert Abel & Associates were all TV network logos and TV commercials. And advertisers would come out and they would just say, well, we can do this and we could do that. Remember the big thing over subliminal advertising? And ad agencies would charge tens of thousands of dollars to add subliminal messages to the ads. And as it turned out, none of it actually worked. And so these people putting out this targeted advertising, I'm sure they're convincing their clients, this is a better way to go. And I can understand a certain amount of focusing because if you, for example, you're buying a gardening tool, it would make sense to have other different garden tools and supplies start showing up. But again, I think more and more people are using these ad blockers, and I can't fault them for it, because of the aggressive, intrusive behavior of many ads and the malvertising problem. And until the industry is ready to police itself and adopt some standards and some security, it's ultimately going to start losing revenue because more and more people are going to be using these ad blockers. And websites that come on out and say, well, we're not going to let you look until you drop your ad blocker, I'm just going to close the browser at that point. It's a question of who's in charge of my machine. And it's not going to be, some advertising agency.
Yeah, you mentioned computer animation. Now every Tom, Dick, and Harry on YouTube has a glitzy computer animation at the start of their, presentation.
Mm-hmm.
That's funny. But one thing about computers, I support an old XP machine that's operating nicely. However, many of the modern antivirus software applications, even if they advertise that they work with XP, do not. They are buggy or they cause lockups and blue screens and stuff like that. And after considerable effort, I finally found that the WebRoot, W-E-B-R-O-O-T, WebRoot antivirus product does work very nicely with Windows XP, doesn't cause lockups, blue screens, or glitches, and it's well rated. It'll cost you $30 a year for it, but it's well worth it if you're trying to keep a legacy Windows XP installation going.
Well, again, I think I've run out of I still have one XP machine here. Generally, I keep it isolated from any kind of patches and updates. I think Malwarebytes still works on XP. Spybot Search and Destroy still works on XP, and those are good ones to have. But the side
I've tried them both, and they both lockups and blue screens.
You may have an issue with that.
I went through about 8 of them.
You may have an issue with that XP installation. It may not be vanilla. There may be some of the problem in there. And a lot of these security programs will conflict with each other. For example, when you install Kaspersky, I think it is, it'll come on up and say, you cannot have these others on this machine, okay to delete. And those other companies are saying, no, that's not a conflict, and you can reinstall once Kaspersky is in and there won't be a problem, which proved to be the case here. But this idea of compatibility, it's very often not true. When I moved to this XP machine, I had a cut of 3D Studio Max, I forget which version, perpetual license, and the documentation says will work on Windows 7. I have given up trying to get it to install. And I'm getting no help from Microsoft. They say that it's 3D Studio Max's problem. And 3D Studio Max is saying, well, you should move to the new subscription-based 3D Studio Max anyway. So there's no more customer service. It's all basically, find a way to get more money out of them or just ignore them. That's where we are.
Right. I think you've mentioned this before, or it's been mentioned on your program, but Kaspersky, and I think Malwarebytes, and maybe even McAfee, several of them make wonderful thumb drive bootable versions. You can take a computer that's uninfected, create your thumb drive, and boot to it, and they do a wonderful job of redeeming an unbootable machine. Yeah,
for somebody who wants to spend, their full-time life becoming a computer security expert, there are a lot of free tools out there. The problem is, from an economic sense, the loss of productivity to the nation as a whole. Because when people are having to patch their computers and repair damage caused by malvertising and so forth, then we're not doing the stuff that makes the money. And that is a real problem with an economy as fragile as ours. And that's why it is such a mystery that the U.S. government does not see all of this cyber crime as a clear and present danger to the nation as a whole. We're talking about billions and billions of dollars in lost productivity. Remember that we've got the ransomware out there. It's actually locked up hospital computer record systems, meaning patients could die because the doctors can't access their medical data. And now there's the new one out there, and it's not even ransomware. It pretends it's ransomware, and it will lock up your machine. And when you send the money, you never hear from them again, and you discover your files have actually been erased. And there's a slang name for that, and I forget what it is, but it's completely, totally out of control. And you have to ask, where is the National Security Agency in all of this? Are they so totally impotent that they can't do anything about this? And if so, let's fire them. Let's sell off all that hardware surplus. I could use some mil-spec hard drives around this shop, because they're not doing anything of benefit to the American people by allowing this cybercrime wave to take over our entire economic system.
You might have a hard time finding a tenant for that huge building in Utah.
Well, I got another idea. Let's turn it into a public utility automated backup system of everything in the country. I mean, they should have a copy of Hillary's missing emails in there, shouldn't they? Or the data that was on Lois Lerner's hard drive. Maybe it's just the world's largest computer porn collection, because Edward Snowden says that's a big part of what they do is they steal pictures of your naked significant other from your hard drives and they drool over them on those hopefully waterproof keyboards.
Hey, what's this with going on with the LL initials with women in politics? Lois Lerner, Linda Lingle, and Loretta Lynch. We have LLs all over the place.
We're in a Superman comic book because it's Lois Lane and Lana Lang and
Lois Lane. Yeah, that's it. That's where
that was an ongoing theme in the Superman comic books.
Oh my goodness, my dad's an LL. Okay, on to politics quickly. About this fellow Gulen. Dr. Stan Monteith was harping about him 3 years ago or more when he was still alive and had his radio show. And this isn't some like cleric in an apartment somewhere with 8 followers. This guy is a multi-gazillionaire who funds madrasa schools all over the place, and he's supposed to be like one of the wealthiest guys in the country or the world or something like that.
And he and his followers are donors to the Hillary Clinton campaign and foundation.
Yeah, that's really crazy. Mentioning Stan Monteith also makes me think of the talk radio world. It's tough. When you're still popular, you're popular, but once you're gone, with guys like Stan Monteith and Bob Chapman, once you're gone, you're forgotten pretty quickly in this realm.
Yeah, I remember back when I worked for Dick Clark, and I got to know some of those hosts as well, like Sweet Dick Whittington, and he was like big star all over Southern California, and then he lost his gig, and like 2 years later he got nobody knew who he was. And all glory is fleeting. Sic transit gloria. And I don't have any illusions that anybody's going to be writing about me in any future history books. And frankly, to be very honest, on the day when the corporate media starts to do its job correctly, I'll be happy to hang all of this stuff up and spend what's left of my life as Claire's roadie on all of her music and choir stuff like this. Because like everybody else in the independent media, or most everybody else in the independent media, we're not getting rich doing this. It's a lot of work. It's 12 to 14 hours a day. And it's not as much fun as some other things I'd like to be doing, like back in computer animation.
Right. The other thing is talk radio is always preparing for, we're talking about prepping for crisis and upheaval or chaos and all that sort of thing. But in the event of any actual nationwide crisis, one of the first things to be shut down, I'm sure, will be talk radio. So
yes.
Part of your prepping plans would be including developing alternate means of communication. And
well, I mean, looking at what's going on in Turkey right now, where Erdogan is shutting down even the corporate media over there to maintain control. All right, well, we're going to switch over to Dale in North Carolina. Aloha, Dale. Thank you for waiting so patiently. What's on your mind?
Hey, I love it when you talk computer stuff.
Okay.
You know, this ad blocker and a flash blocker. You know, I've noticed it actually speeds up my load times. Do you know that satellite companies, they offer the broadband, but, you know, with the bandwidth restrictions and stuff, that really does help. The ad blocker and the flash blocker really does help on cutting down on that bandwidth stuff, you know.
Yeah, it does, and I don't know why people are still using Shockwave Flash. It's basically being dropped. We have no Shockwave at the WhatReallyHappened.com website because it's been a huge security problem, but a lot of the advertisers still do, and a lot of the websites we link to still do, and it can cause problems. By the way, for those of you using the Chrome browser, something I discovered. If you go into advanced settings, there's a little checkbox that says use hardware acceleration if available. And for some reason, if you uncheck it, Chrome gets a lot faster. And apparently over at the Chrome development website, they know it's an issue. Yes, it's a problem, and we're going to fix it in the next release. Yeah, again, it's another case of sloppy code writing. So if you're on Chrome and you're having a problem with the website being slow, uncheck that box that says use hardware acceleration, and you're probably going to see a tremendous performance boost. And by the way, I've gotten a bunch of emails since talking about firing some of my misbehaving advertisers, confirming that my website is performing a lot better than it was a week or so ago, okay?
I've been using Ubuntu for quite a few years on an old laptop I got, and it seems to be. What's your thoughts on Ubuntu?
Well, I actually started on Linux back when I was starting with computer animation and Robert Abel and Associates. All the computer graphic works was being done on Berkeley Unix and Kernighan and Ritchie C Standard. So I didn't get into Windows or any of these others until much later on. And Linux, in terms of its user interface, is so much like Unix. It's to me, it feels like it's the same thing. And yes, I have Linux cuts here. This machine is dual boot, and I don't have as much time to play with Linux as I'd like. But on the day when I'm willing to give up all my animation software and everything, I'm probably just going to put this into pure Linux. Because, yeah, it is so much faster because it's not, first of all, it's not carrying the overhead of Windows, and second, you don't have all of these security software running and just sucking up half the machine to begin with. And it is blazingly fast.
The shutdown time is dramatically quicker. I mean, the processes and everything in the background, I mean, it's just less intense on your processors. It really is a smooth running system.
You know, there are days I'll haul down that VIC-20 computer and play with it because it reminds me of a time when computers were still fun.
I got to ask you a question. I've heard you talk about this. I just want to throw this at you. You're always saying how the Saudis will always, they could shut us down by taking our money. Well, didn't Germany ask for the gold and we never did anything about it and they didn't get their money? So explain how you think that the Saudis were going to, they're going to put us in a hardship when Germany didn't even get their gold back.
Well, you're dealing in the case of gold bullion that was on deposit at the Federal Reserve and the J.P. Morgan, and that was a big stink, but it was outside the normal investment credit lines, and so it could be sort of put off to one side, and Germany was convinced to stop asking for their gold as much. If Saudi Arabia decides they want their money and they can't be talked into not wanting it anymore, that is directly inside the credit system and investment system, and it's going to be virtually impossible to ignore them. And were the U.S. government to try and simply block it and say you can't have your money back, you're going to see every other nation with money invested or deposited inside the United States yank it on out. And that would really be the end of the whole situation. Now, you need to remember that the reason so many other countries park their money inside the United States goes all the way back to George Herbert Walker Bush and the first S&L bailout. Because what that was a demonstration that the U.S. government had the political will that if foreign interests would put their money in the United States, if they made money, they could keep it. If they lost money, the losses would be transferred onto the taxpayer. So it was a zero-risk situation. That's what the S&L bailout was really all about, was convincing the rest of the world that America has a fascist economic system. If you make money, you keep it. If you lose money, the people are made to pay. And that has kept a lot of investment in this country up until this point. But on the day when the U.S. government blocks Saudi Arabia or anybody else from lawfully withdrawing their funds from the United States, you're going to see a panic rush for the borders.
Okay, thanks, Mike.
All right, thank you very much here, and we're going to grab Fred in Iowa. Aloha, Fred. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. I'm not a nerd or a geek. I got XP 1000. And I've got Melware lights and Avast on it. And it takes about 6 minutes for me to, when I turn it on, so it works. But should I go to Linux?
That is entirely up to you, and it depends on what you want to be doing with your machine. There are windowing interfaces for Linux now. It wasn't the case early on in Unix until X Windows came along. But, if you just want to use your computer like an appliance, you probably should stick with Windows. If you really want to just use a computer as an appliance, you ought to be on a Mac anyway, because that's their design perspective. Linux is for people who like to do their own coding and want to talk to the bare metal.
Well, I understand what Dave, on that, he's not there no more, but he was a geek and all this, that Linux, you can have the program with Linux and also what you're running, what I'm running right now, and you can switch back and forth till you learn Linux.
Yeah,
but
you can
I
either...
do one hell of a lot of research. I'm all over the dang web. But I'm also a trader, and it's getting me up, messing me up.
All right, well, listen, we're going to let you go, and I'll give you a brief answer when we come back from these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and I'm getting all kinds of emails from people about various ways to recover lost files off a drive. And in the case of Claire's first Acquire machine, it wasn't necessary because that machine was basically cloning the data that was developed on her music computer and my editing production computer. So, plus we keep good backups around here anyway. We have our own backup system. We will not go to the cloud no matter what. So the data was protected in depth, and we didn't actually lose anything. It was just the idea that Windows 10 all of a sudden did this dramatic reconfiguration without asking us, and stuff was just gone. And at that point I said, I'm in charge of this machine, and the attitude of Windows 10 is Microsoft is in charge of that machine, and I absolutely will not tolerate that. Now, getting on back to Fred's question, if you want to learn Linux and you only have a single machine, there are two ways to go, depending upon how sophisticated you are. You can go with a dual boot machine, in which case your computer can boot either to Windows or to Linux. The advantage of that is when you're in Linux, that's all you're in, and Linux gets 100% of the machine's resources. The other way to go that may be a bit safer is with a virtual sandbox. And up until Windows 7, Microsoft provided one called the Virtual PC, but you can get third-party virtual sandbox, which can be configured for an older version of Windows or for Linux. There was one that was out, and I'm going to have to hunt down the name of it. It was a sandbox with a highly secure browser in it. Absolutely impossible for anything that you're browsing through that sandbox to infect your local machine, and it looks like maybe we need to start going back to that anyway. So at this point, it's almost like they're declaring war on us computer users. Even as they're trying to make more and more money off of us, they're making our lives more and more difficult. And it just makes common sense. If we're spending all our time fixing our machines, then we're not doing online shopping, are we? It's time for some thinking. Now, my normal recommendation for everybody is to, acquire and use security systems. Many are free and are very good, like Malwarebytes and Spybot Search and Destroy. Some you have to pay for. And it's a losing battle here. Article out of the Register in Great Britain, where researchers are saying that security products like AVG, Symantec, and McAfee are not secure because of flawed uses of what's called code hooking. And basically, they're saying even the Windows security tools have all these problems because they're being rushed to market before they're fully tested. And that's become an attitude that infects the entire industry. We're going to release it now. We're going to wait for the customers to find the problems and send them in, and that way we'll send a bunch of money on quality insurance. We're all being turned into unpaid software testers for the software companies, and I don't like that. If I'm going to work for you, I demand a salary, certainly well above minimum wage. There's the music. Time for me to get out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. We'll be back here tomorrow, Thursday, on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay safe, stay skeptical, stay informed, make good choices, share what you know with everybody that you know. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.